Chapter 5 Genetics Introduction and History. Genetics is a branch of biology that deals with inherited variations of an organism or a group of organisms, as well as the expression of genes responsible for those variations. Simply, genetic branch of biology study how the genetical traits are transported from one generation to another and how these genes show their effects on appearance of organisms. Genetics is concerned with the following. These three states important. As we remember from chapter 1, the three states of cell theory summarized all chapter 1. Similarly, these 3 points summarize the all chapter 5, the genetics. Genetics study on transmission of genetic traits from one generation to another. Number 2, genetics trying to understand the molecular structure of genetic material. We know the genetic material is DNA and RNA. So genetic study on its chemical structure. And now the changes happen in the structure. We call it mutation. So any change happen in structure of genetic material of an organism, we call it mutation. And various applications, how these changes affect on organisms. Number 3, genetic studies on how genetic expression occur, how genes show their effects on appearance of organisms. At phenotypic means appearance of organism, and the molecular level means chemical structure. As a historical introduction, the first person who named this branch of biology as genetics is Bateson in 1996. Firstly, the genetic variations for the useful types were selected in the past. The recognized characteristics were chosen which served generations, considering every diabetic was, especially in agricultural field. It talk about how the genetic is used in the past, mainly in agricultural field. Mendel produced a system, so Mendel is the first scientist who did experiment and succeed, a system to control hereditary qualities which was not associated with sex. So Mendel studied on genetical traits which are common for male and female, but not related to the sex of organism. He published an article in 1866 as research on some vegetable hybrids, but unfortunately none of the scholars of the time paid attention to the Mendel because they were busy with evolution theory. The discovery of Mendel experiments by 3 scientists, then the biology go beyond, and this age called the golden age for cell biology, and they assumed that the chromosomes are the carrier of genetic traits from one generation another, which was not realized before. Even the Mendel didn't use the term of chromosome. The third quarter of the 20th century period of find solution for many questions like description of structure of genetic material. So James D.W. Watson and Francis Crick, 1953, they described the structure of genetic material, DNA. So these names like Francis Crick, Davis Watson, name of scientist, is important. Let's fill in the blank questions. Then the geneticists began to study about the field of biotechnology in 70s. They were able to hybrid the DNA of different types, means they mixed the DNA genetic material of different organisms to find the effective drugs, and also they to discover the genes that causes some genetical diseases, and also diagnosis methods, and doing tests before the appearance of the symptoms and treatment of this kind of diseases by genetic engineering. By why was the DNA used in genetic engineering but not another chemical or organic material in cytoplasm of cell? Because DNA has 3 important properties, so it used in this field. DNA has ability to be transported from one organism to another by what? By some viruses and plasmids, as we study in chapter 3, by lytic or lysogenic cycle, so we can transport any kind of genetic material from one organism to another in this method. It has ability to modulate the recipient cell function. So as we remember in lytic cycle, when the viral DNA enters the bacteria, it takes control of cell and uses the cell functions, moderate them, and to produce new viruses. Number 3, the DNA has ability to replicate inside the cell naturally, as we study in interphase stage of mitosis and meiosis, and also outside through the outside in laboratory by polymerase chain reaction. So these 3 important properties of DNA. So it uses in genetic and genetic, or in diagnosis of diseases and treatment. At the beginning of the 21st century, especially in 2003, the sequence of nitrogenous bases, which are monomers of genetic material DNA, it fully has been unveiled. Like what? Like finding all letters in a book. So all this information stored in genetic material of human on chromosomes, about 3.3 billion genes, it's known as genome. Research currently focuses on genome. Why on genome? Because to know the gene expression, how it takes place in different organisms, in patient or healthy person. Also for detection of differences that has priority to character building and their differentiation. The genetics or the basic rules of genetics is set by Mendel. So the genetics is divided or branched as according to Mendel. It called genetics before Mendel, like pre-Mendel genetics, Mendelian genetics, and genetics after Mendel. Pre-Mendel genetics, the role of civilization of Mesopotamia, about how this civilization they used genetics in their life. The ancient civilization era made studies of varieties of wheat, rice, cotton, beans, as well as the cattle and horses during the period between 4000 to 800 before Christ. But about how they used it, as we remember from the chapter 3 in sexual reproduction, like cross-pollination has great impact on quality number of product. So in this civilization, they know the importance of sexual reproduction in genetics for crop improvement through the exercise like palm vaccination, and also matching between the different breeds of cattle which give more flesh or more milk. This documented, we get this information from what? From the documents unique message written in cuneiform script about 1360 before Christ. And this gives a accurate description of how to train the horses, because they choose the best horses for breeding of new generation, which are better in race. The role of Nile Valley civilization, they use the genetic mainly in agricultural field, like what? Like on the selection types of wheat with better quality and abundance of production. The role of Greek civilization, Greek philosophers were interested in clarifying the similarity between relatives, like Hippocrates referred to the repetition of certain human quality like crossed eye and boldness traits. They observed this trait through the generation for some certain families through centuries. He also noted the spread of certain diseases such as epilepsy, certain types of blindness in certain families. Greek discovered the symptoms of human syndrome, such as Down syndrome, which we study in chapter 4. They were also concerned with the structure of provided natural body immunity. As we see, the Greek civilization determined and observed some certain human traits or some abnormalities through generation in some certain families, and discovering some symptoms of Down syndrome. The role of the Europeans before Mendel, The scientist Maupertuis was one of the scientists who highlighted the importance of human genetics. He collected the records of pedigree on the families that have albinism. Albinism is abnormality which is absence of melanin pigment in skin, so the person or organism in hair color and skin is the role of Europeans before Mendel. Biologist Maupertuis, one of the scientists who highlighted the importance of human genetics. He collected records, means observed again some abnormalities of human traits through generation by drawing on a special type. We call it pedigree, which consists of square male and female, marriage, giving birth, like again female, male, or with Down syndrome. So observe it like abnormalities like albinism, which is absence of melanocyte pigment in skin and hair of organism, and analyze predicted the probability of occurrence of this abnormality in future generations. Then also they observed some other genetic trait in humans, such as eye color or abundance of hair and flesh in some kinds of cattle. After mid-century, again in Europe, August Weismann put forward and the theory that the germplasm means material which located in cytoplasm of reproductive cell, is the genetic material transmitted from one generation to another. August Weismann, again, is a scientist before Mendel. He assumed that what make relatives look like one another or transmission of abnormalities or some traits through generation is about the germplasm, which is a material transmitted from one generation to another. Then they did some experiments, but unfortunately they were not succeed, and they experiments until the scientist, Austrian researchers, Mendel made major assumptions about transmission of genetic traits through generation in result of his experiments on pea plant.